Okay, we continue our presentation with functions. Functions are uh, one of the most common uses of JavaScript is to develop functions. They define a group of JavaScript instructions which are placed in the head section of the HTML document normally. Um, these actions are to be performed when triggered by some event, for example, the user clicking a link. The functions may be triggered as and when necessary from within the body section of the HTML document and are reusable. They may be triggered as many times as you need from the body. Here is the syntax for functions. We need to come up, we use the keyword function, then we come up with some meaningful name for the function. We use a set of parentheses, and then in between the curly braces we provide the statements that need to be executed when this function is called. An example, down here again we have a blank paragraph called function1. Inside the script we create the actual function called myFunction. It takes two arguments, a and b. It uses those two arguments to figure out the product, their product, so it calculates a times b and returns that as the result. And the way we use the function is to, once we calculate the product of the two numbers that we supply, we place that as HTML inside the paragraph. So the way this works here is we're going to call function 1 to figure out the product of 4 and 3. It will return 12, and then we're going to stick that into the paragraph called func1. So this is an example of how to declare a function and then how to use it. Okay, and here's what you can call a function template. You got the template for the function declaration, and then down normally inside the body we have the statements where we call that function, from where we trigger the function. Okay, one more example. Within the body section we create a clickable press me button inside the form, and inside the form we specify that when that button is clicked we want to call a function called display message. Alright. Display message itself is inside the heading section. What does it do? It simply displays the message "Have a great day" inside an alert box. One more example. In this one here we implement a function called display message again with "Have a great day," and then I'm sorry about this. This is the exact same example, so it really just a repeat of what we just saw. On the screen, what happens is when we press the press me button, we end up with an alert box with an OK button to dismiss it. And that takes us to operators. There's different operators in JavaScript. We got arithmetic operators that allow us to perform arithmetic operations. We got logical operators, comparisons, string operators, operators that perform actions on individual bits. We got assignment operators and conditional operators. And we are about to see each set of those in a second. Okay, the arithmetic operators on the next slide include addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You can see some examples over on this side. The modulo or modulus operator performs an integer division of the two arguments and returns the result, or as they say, it calculates the remainder. It returns the remainder. So 20 divided by 5 equals 4. It's an equal division. There is no remainder, so the expression here will evaluate to 0. Increment allows you to increment the value by 1, and decrement allows you to decrement the value of the variable by 1. So it's like subtracting 1 from it. And a quick example of how to use arithmetic operators in your code. Over here we declare three variables, x, y, and z, x and y are assigned values 5 and 3, and then z is assigned the sum of x and y. So the browser is going to compute the sum of x and y, we'll figure out that's 8, and it will assign it to z. And then this will be displayed on the screen as part of paragraph A1. The unary arithmetic operators, really what they do is they just allow you to add 1 to the current value of the variable or subtract 1 from it. So over here, counter plus plus, when you execute that statement, the value stored in counter will be increased by 1. Counter minus minus will decrease the value stored in counter by 1. Plus plus counter is going to also increase the value stored in counter by 1, and minus minus counter is going to decrease the value stored in counter by 1. The difference between these two sets is that with the post incrementing operator, if this thing here is part of a larger expression, the incrementation will take place after the whole expression is computed. So the current value of the counter will be used in the computation of the bigger expression, and then counter will be incremented. Whereas down here, if you have pre-incrementing operator, the first thing that you do is you'll increment the value of counter, and only then will you use its value inside the bigger expression in which it's part of. Assignment operators allow you to assign a value to a variable. That's the standard one, just a single equal sign. Takes the value of the expression on the right side and assigns it to the variable that appears on the left side. The rest of these, they're combo operators. Plus equal sign is the same as it adds whatever value you see on the right side to whatever is already inside the variable on the left side. So this is equivalent to a equals a plus 5. And you do the same thing with all the other ones. Okay. For example, for the last one, a equals a modulus 2. The computer will calculate integer division of these two values and figure out the remainder and assign that to a. Okay. Let me undo here because the examples actually need to use the original operators we see on the left. Inside the JavaScript, here's an example. We initialize x to 10. The modulo divided value of 10 by 5 is going to produce a remainder of 10 divided by 5 is 2. There's no remainder, so x will be assigned the value of 0, and 0 will be printed as part of the paragraph called demo. Okay. Comparison operators allow you to compare two values. The 2 equal sign is the standard comparison operator in most languages. In JavaScript, you are comparing two values without taking into account their data type. So these two will actually be equal to each other, regardless of the fact that the one on the left is a string, the one on the right is an integer. Okay, the computer is going to treat both of these as 5s. If you want strict comparison, you're going to be using the 3 equal signs. In this case, the browser is going to check and make sure that not only the values are equal, but their types are the same. And over here, you'll end up with a result of false, because this will be, the first one will be treated as a string. This is an integer. These two cannot possibly be equal to each other, and the value of the whole expression will be equivalent to false. Not equal in JavaScript is given with the exclamation point equal sign, and again we have the strictly not equal, where we take into account data types. Greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So this is a summary of all the comparison operators in JavaScript. Logical operators, you see how we use a logical AND, OR, and then NOT if we need to. So for example, if we want to say If 3 is greater than 2 and 5 is less than 2, then do something. This is the way to spell it out in code. Now, is this true or false? Well, 3 is greater than 2, so that's true. But 5 is not less than 2, so that's false. And the way the AND works is it's going to produce false here because it needs both of its operands to equal true in order for the end result to be true. The OR, the only time that the OR can produce false is if both operands are false. And then the NOT simply checks to verify whether two values are not equal. So if 5 not equal to 3 here is going to produce true, because that is indeed true. Okay, so the logical NOT is true when the operand is false. Okay. Strict equality operators. Just a quick demo here. This little snippet of code is going to take current word and current value, which are assigned the values of 20 and 20. One of them is a string, the other one is an integer, and it will compare the two. The first time we do equal to, but not the strict version, and that will produce a result of true. The second time we do a strict comparison, and since these are two different types, you're going to see false for that one. All right. As far as strings are concerned, most likely we're going to need to use the concatenation operation. So there are other functions that we can apply to the string objects, but for now we're only looking at the operator that allows you to concatenate two strings together, to stick them together. So in this example we have the words hello and world. If we stick them together, notice how there's no space around any one of these two words. The end result, or the return value, would be hello world without a space between those two words. Okay. Bit manipulation. Now this is also useful if you get to do some advanced stuff where it's unlikely that we're going to need this in this class, but we still need to be aware of how these work and what they represent. They allow you to work with the individual values of bits for different values. The bitwise AND is going to examine and AND each bit one by one for the two operands that you supply. The bitwise OR is going to OR the individual bits of the two operands. The XOR, or the exclusive OR, is going to check and tell you whether the individual bits are different or not. Again, I'm skipping some information here. I'm going to provide it to you the moment we're going to need to use these operators. The bitwise left shift is going to shift all the bits to the left, so all values go one position to the left, bit by bit. Bitwise right shift is going to do the same, but it will move the bit numbers or the bit values to the right. And then the last one is going to shift the bits of the expression to the right and then also fill the number with zeros. Okay. This is probably going to come in handy pretty soon. The math object has a few predefined functions that you may want to learn about and use in your own coding. The one that returns an absolute value, the ceiling, the cosine, the exponent, floor, the logarithm base e, maximum value, minimum value. The power one is probably the one you're going to use. It takes x and it raises it to the power of y, and it returns that as the result. Random returns a random value between 0 and 1. Round allows you to round a number to the nearest integer. Sine, the square root, is also one that you're likely to use soon. It simply calculates the square root of the operator that you have provided. And the tangent. and this is a quick demo of how to use the math object. This one here uses um, the random function. So basically we have a button um, which once clicked is going to call my function, and my function is going to generate a random number between 0 and 1 and stick that into the empty paragraph called demo. Order of precedence. um, I just added this here to give you a quick example of how this works. Basically, this table tells you how operators are going to be executed, or how operations will be executed if you have a larger expression. So you don't have just two um, values you're trying to add or divide or subtract. In this example over here, I've got three different values, and in my expression, I've got 2 plus 3 times 4. The table over here tells you which operators are more binding than others, or more powerful than others. Um, the one at level 1, the one at the top here, are the most binding or most powerful. They will be executed first. Then you execute the ones on level 2. Then you 3, 4, and you go down. The least significant or least binding, least powerful operator is the one down here at the bottom. So if you've never used this before, chances are you'll be tempted to compute this mathematically. You'd say 2 plus 3 is 5 times 4, that's 20. Well, in computer science, the multiplication operator is more binding, it's more powerful than the addition. So the computer over here, if you leave this expression the way it is right now, is going to calculate the product of 3 and 4 first, and that's 12, and then it will add 2 to it. And the end result of this expression will be 14. If you wanted 2 and 3 to be added first, you would want to ensure they're enclosed in parentheses, and only then um, that addition will take place before the multiplication, because the parentheses operator is up at the top here. It's the most powerful one, and that's how precedence works. Okay. The scope of a variable. You use variables in JavaScript in functions, and if you declare the variable inside a function, it becomes a local variable. It stops existing when the function ends. A global variable is one that is declared outside of a function and is accessible in any part of your program. So that's the difference between global and local variables. The conditional statements. Here's a summary of the conditional statements that exist in JavaScript. If else, and switch are the three types of statements that we can use in JavaScript. How's the syntax defined? Well, if you just have an if statement, you would say if something is true, that something in here is an expression. It could be a single variable, but it could be a function call, or it could be an entire expression. It will ultimately evaluate to either true or false. If the expression is true, then you're going to execute the set of statements that are in between the curly braces. If it's false, you do nothing. You just move on to the next statement in your program. If else, the way it works is if this condition is true, you execute the statements in the if clause. However, if this is false, then you're going to come down here to the else clause and you'll execute the statements in the else clause. The keyword if always appears in lowercase. Remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. And the condition here is going to always yield a logical true or false value. Okay. So this else clause is optional. You don't have to have it, but if it's useful to you, then you can use it. So let's take a look at an example. Over here we got a piece of code which will invite the user to enter well, let's see what we have. Okay, we got a text box called age, and we assign the value of 18 to it, and then we got a a button which we can click that calls the function age. The function age declares two variables, age and votable. Well, this local age here is gonna get the value assigned to the output, I'm sorry, input box, which is called age outside, and it's gonna check and see if it's undefined. It's gonna tell you that there's a problem, we cannot proceed. So this is sort of a way to make our code foolproof. We check for errors. Otherwise, we know the user has provided a number, and we check to see what that number is. If it's less than 18, we're going to return the string too young. If it's not less than 18, so if this thing evaluates to false, we're going to return old enough. And this is what we display inside the age 1 paragraph, which initially is blank. Okay, so feel free to run this as an HTML file and see how it works. This is new. The way this works is, I think they call this the conditional operator or the ternary operator. It's kind of a shortcut way of doing an if-else if. So we've got a condition over here. If it's true, we execute the statement that you see over here, the first one, the one that appears on the left side of the column. If it's false, we execute or return the statement, the value that is on the right side of the column. So like I said, you don't have to use this. This is just a shortcut way of doing an if-else. This is actually a pretty good topic for an exercise. I'm going to include this in one of our exercises. I'll show you how to use an if-else if and then how to replace it or how to implement it with the help of this shortcut conditional operator. And then of course you can nest these if-else ifs as many times as you need, so you can have multiple if-elses. An example here, if the character value is greater than capital A, check and see if it's less than capital Z. At this point we know that we're looking at an uppercase character. We display that in the dialog box. Otherwise, if character value is greater than or equal to lowercase a, we know we're looking at a lowercase character. So this is an example of how to use a nested if-else statement. Okay. The switch statement allows you to enumerate a bunch of cases, and it's really good if the cases are actual numbers, so you're not dealing with ranges. You're dealing with a finite list of values here. In our case, this is the syntax. We do switch. We evaluate the expression, which should evaluate to one of the values that are listed in the cases below. Okay, if it matches label 1, you come down here, you execute the statements, and you end the switch statement. If it doesn't match any of the values listed here, you're going to come down to the default case and you'll execute the set of statements that you see here. An example of this, we prompt the user to enter a character in lowercase, and we've got a switch statement that basically looks at the character variable. If it's lowercase a, we let the user know it's a lowercase a. We end the switch. If it's an e, we do the same. We let the user know we know it's an e. We end the case. If it's anything else, we assume it's not a vowel, and we display that it's not a vowel. So the default case is basically in all other cases. All right, looping. How do we create iteration in JavaScript? We can use for loops, for in loops, while loops, and do while loops. The break and the continue are simply auxiliary commands that allow you to either break out of a loop or to go on to the next iteration of the loop without executing any additional commands. The for statements, one of the most used and familiar loops is this for loop. It iterates through a sequence of statements for a number of times, controlled by a condition. So we got an initial expression, we got an expression that changes. We specify how it changes, and then a list of statements. So normally the way we use it is we set up a counter, we initialize the counter. Um, Over here in the third slot we describe how that counter changes. So counter plus plus simply means add 1 to the value of counter, and we're going to keep doing this for as long as counter is less than or equal to 10. Okay, the moment it becomes greater than 10, it's our sentinel value, we break out of the for loop. It ends. So this is what we should expect this for loop to display, the one up above. We start with 1, we display 1 times 1. Next, in the next iteration, we increment counter to 2. We add to the list of values 2 times 2, that's 4. Then we do 3 times 3, then 4 times 4, and we keep going like this until we reach 10 times 10. Okay. The for in is a way to actually force the counter variable to assume all values that exist in the given object. So very much like a regular for loop, except that this regular object is really just an array or a list of all the values that counter can assume. So when the for in statement is used, the counter and the termination are determined by the length of this object here. The statement begins with 0 as the initial value of the counter variable, and it terminates with all the properties of the objects have been exhausted. The while loop is going to keep executing for as long as this condition is true. So you keep looping until the termination condition is met. The counter variable is managed by the context of the statements inside the curly braces. So we have to ensure that we change that condition in here, and that at one point we reach a sentinel value that helps us break out of this loop. If we don't ensure that, we're stuck with an infinite loop. An example of this one here, we say while counter is greater than 0, we have initialized it to 100. Keep displaying number plus whatever the counter is, and then decrement or subtract 10 from the value of counter. Have we ensured that we're going to reach the sentinel value? Let's see. We start at 100, go 90, 80, 70, 60, and at one point it does become equal to 0, which forces this condition to no longer be true, and we break out of the loop. The do while loop always executes the statements in the loop in the first iteration. So you're going to do this set of statements at least once. And you're going to keep doing that while the expression in between the parentheses here is true. So the termination condition is placed at the bottom of the loop. Okay. That wraps up the discussion on controlling the control structures in the JavaScript language. Pretty much any language is considered to be a language if it's got operators, so the arithmetic operators along with all the other ones that we saw, if it can handle variables, and if it can has the control structures for iterations, conditions, and sequence. If you have those three features, then you're looking at a computer language, a programming language that you can use to accomplish pretty much any task, from something as simple as adding 2 and 2 to something as complex as brain surgery. Okay, in the final slide here, the final couple of slides, I've got a list of several popular free JavaScript libraries. jQuery is probably the most prominent one of these, and it's covered in our textbook as well. What these libraries do for you is they provide you with a lot of predefined functions that you can use in your own coding, so that you don't have to invent the wheel every time. Now, the features that we already have as part of JavaScript are sufficient for us to do a lot of stuff. But if you really like JavaScript and you go on to writing some more advanced programs, um, you might want to research these further and find out exactly what they can do for you. Perhaps some of these have functions that let you handle images. Some of these have a lot of additional functions that let you handle web forms and things like that. So you'll be able to benefit by simply reusing the code that already somebody else has created for you. Oops, and that was the summary for jQuery as well. So it's a library intended to simplify client-side scripting. So with considerably less effort, you should be able to accomplish more. And again, I'm not talking here about something like your lab assignment 6 where you just have to handle a couple of equations. I'm talking about things like creating, for example, an animation or a computer game or something like that, something advanced. This here is an example of someone using jQuery. You might want to check it out just to see what kinds of things you can accomplish with this. And what can it be used for? It gives you interactive, this one here, jQuery, gives you interactive features for image slideshows, animations for moving, hiding, fading, additional processing for event handling, things like mouse movements and mouse clicking, document manipulation, and Ajax. Ajax, again, just like DOM, you really need to know it as a term. You don't have to know the details of it. It's a set of tools that allow you to update individual parts of a web page. Okay, so if you don't want to refresh the entire web page when something changes on it, but rather you just want to change a single element, for example, this is going to be your tool. And I think there's a section on it in our textbook as well. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching.